This topic is cross-gender sponsorship, and no. Andrew's already making fun. Okay, this is a. Andrew, go put your wig back on. Cross-gender sponsorship. We're just going to talk about it. That's all. And you guys make up your own mind because you're your own individuals. So my experience in cross-gender sponsorship, my very, very first meeting I went to in any 12-step program more than 25 years ago, I walked into an OA meeting and a woman tried to 13-step me. Day one. My antennas were up. I got what was going on. I was almost ready to do it because I was lonely. Anybody comes into a 12-step program has some loneliness issue, but I didn't think it was right. It just didn't feel right. It felt dangerous, actually. Dangerous, quite dangerous. Long story, she belonged to a cult, a 12-step cult out in Connecticut, and they recruited both men and women, and they pretty much sexually enslaved them. And years later, they got sued. I know a woman that got a lawsuit money. She didn't get much, but she got money out of that. And they had their own little thing in Connecticut, and you lived there and washed there, and you were basically sexually abused. And the guy that did that was an expert at the big book and could quote chapter and verse and everything, and he could pretty much control your life. So that's a danger of that does happen. Also, this is just my own personal knowledge. I've been around for a while, so I've also had connected with a lot of fellows in many, many different fellowships. And there's a lot of fellows that I know that just can't wait to sponsor a woman because their only ability to connect romantically with somebody is when the fourth step happened, the sex stuff happened, they know that the woman's vulnerable. And that's their way of getting into someone's pants. So there are a lot of guys. I'm hoping there's a lot less guys out there today than there were years ago, because years ago these dynamics weren't fully understood, but they happened, and today we understand there's S programs, and usually people like that end up in those programs, and hopefully they'll come into recovery. But those things do happen. So and because of that, Alcoholics Anonymous always said the men with the men, the women with the women, unless there's a really, really big exception, a big exception. So, having all said that, I have in the past sponsored a woman, only if I know or if I think I can tolerate it, handle it, and usually what happens is I don't listen to the fourth step. I've done that a couple of times. Guys, it's highly erotic, and it's a challenge. It's an absolute challenge. And it's not something that's fun to be subjugated to. The purpose of Eros is something totally different, It really is. And you don't need to be, subjugated to that. So I prefer not to. I've heard one of my colleagues in some of the other programs, they say if a woman approaches him and he finds her attractive, he'll say, I'm sorry, but you're way too attractive for me to sponsor, but I will date you. Okay? So that changes a lot of things. Now, let's just change a different idea here. We're a young fellowship. There's people that are sponsoring that don't have a lot of have not a recovery in other areas of their life. There are dynamics of sexuality that are love, eros, romance, relationships. There's people that are relationship addicted. There's people that are relationship anorexic. There's people that are sexually anorexic. There's people that are romantically anorexic. So what happens if you hook up with a sponsor that's anorexic and he's capable of sponsoring you? Well, you're doing both of yourself a harm, really. Because, and there's a certain amount of dependency in the cross-gender relationship that's a dynamic that may or may not be healthy. So the way A does it is they say, yeah, get a same-sex sponsor, but make friends with the opposite sex. Socialize with them, hang out with them, begin to understand with them, and maybe at one point start dating them, but don't have them sponsor you. You know, that's their thing. So it's a tricky thing. It can be done, but is it worth the effort to the psyche? Is it? Some people maybe, maybe not. You know, I don't know. There's a lot of things involved, because whatever a man can gain by sponsoring a woman, he can gain by becoming friends with women within the fellowship. It's the same thing. You don't need to hear their sexual history. The last thing I want to do is sit down with a woman who's my sponsor and give her my real details of sexual history, because I can be very, very explicit. I know everything. I don't have any shame about discussing anything about my sex life. Last thing I want you to do is subjugate you to that, because you're going to have to deal with the erotic impulses that happen when I do that, and they will come up. And so it's not a good thing to be dealing with. Or you can just fluff off the fourth step. You know, I don't know how other people do the fourth step, you know. And, you know, and the way the fourth step traditionally is really done is they talk about infidelities and things like that. And it's really all not that graphic. But there's other ways of doing that fourth step that are graphic, you know. And when you're involved with a male sponsor, there's still shame, but you have the ability more to be graphic. Now, on the other hand, let's say you're gay. And so maybe a gay woman, you're a gay man, gay woman, maybe that's appropriate, you know, because now the dynamics don't happen. The attraction is not going to happen. So I'm always a believer in you know, no. But I have had an exception. Just recently, about a year and a half, a woman in this program asked me to sponsor her because she knows I have a black belt in some other programs, and she had a problem in other areas, and so I said sure, you know, because I'm from the old school. When somebody asks you, you never say no. You just don't. You don't say no. You say yes. You just say yes. You just say yes to all that. And I'm right away looking for the landmines. So the phone calls involved were mostly about me and her discussing her recent romantic entanglement that she's been involved in a long time. Now, that's good. That's okay. I can handle that. I've got a lot of solutions to dealing with romantic entanglements, a lot of them. And I can be very, very helpful. I could write a book on it. But that's not the issue. The issue is she never really addressed any of her UA stuff. Whenever we talked about UA, that got fluffed over. And the bottom line is she never really did any of the things about her romantic entanglement until her romantic entanglement hit her in the face. She didn't really even deal. She was in denial about certain aspects. Now, I was glad to do that service because I'm willing to help anybody in any way, shape, or form that they need that can be helped. You know, if you have an issue about a grief of your mom and dad dying, I'm there with you. You know what I mean? You know, I'm not there with you as a counselor. I'm just there with you. You know what I mean? But at the same time, you're deviating from the path of what this program is really all about. And I do believe a sponsor needs to be deeper than just a step guide. I really do. I just do. I think that there's a magical relationship about sponsorship. And I guess this program has just not gotten there yet to have that kind of deep involvement with another human being. Because the nature of a sponsorship relationship is really, in truth, a kind of, involves a lot of different things. It involves a reparenting kind of a thing. A lot of different things happen in that relationship. I got a lot out of, even the guy that jumped off the bridge, I got a lot out of him in early work because he was always there to answer the phone, you know? So there's stuff that happens in these relationships. There's more I can say, but I think I want to turn it over to Andrew, because he's a founder and he's got his opinions. His opinions are valid. Come on, Andrew. And I love Andrew, and he always says something very provocative, and he always makes light of it. Which when you make light of it, the closest thing to cosmic is cosmic.
Thank you.
Yeah. And we'll be open for questions.
In the words of Victor Borger, a smile is the shortest distance between two people.
Hey.
I have female sponsees. I always say to them, turn your sexual history over to another woman. It's as simple as that. The fourth step is very important. Without doing fourth step, you can't recover. But I always say, turn your sexual history over to, actually what I say, look, if you want to tell me, but I'd prefer that you talk to a woman in another fellowship. I'm not a voyeur, and I don't need to get off on listening to erotic details or dysfunctional details from a sponsee's life. Other than that, you know, having started the fellowship, I really can't, I don't have the stomach, thank you. I don't have the stomach for coming on to someone in the fellowship that I'm sponsoring. I just can't do that. You know, it's like, this is insane. I certainly don't believe in 13 stepping, although I haven't been asked, so I'm really upset about that. Finally, it's happened. Thank God. But,
Panama?
yeah, what's that? I'm going. Dave and I are going to Panama later today, so. He said he'd show me the canals. Beautiful dreamer, wake unto me. But the bottom line is, hey, listen, man, you know, like John, who's my sponsor, has tons of female sponsees, and you know, he does not do any of that exploitation of a vulnerable person. Having said that, there is a different dynamic for me in sponsoring a woman than sponsoring a guy. It's not the same thing. Certainly, the little part of my DNA that wants to be the knight in shining armor comes up and you know, let me write, you know, do that. But after a while, a lot of that fades as well. And you know, I have sponsees that, it's not that I hate them, but there's some who I like more than other sponsees. And there's some who I really, you know, I'm a human being. So yeah, there are some people who I like more and like less. But I don't really get in the way. I just figure, listen, you know, I'm here as your guide, and we're gonna work this thing out. But I think it's really buyer beware. If you're a woman and you're in the fellowship and you know, a guy you think want to sponsor, you really just, you know, suss them out, get a sense of where it is. But on the other hand, you're not signing a contract. So if it gets sort of squirrely and gnarly and wacko and squacko, you could just terminate and say, listen, this isn't working out for me. We're all different people. Some of us, I mean, Eddie mentioned anorexia, and that's certainly a term from SLAA. And there are, yeah, I mean, I've been in SLAA, I've done a tour through that fellowship. And there are people who are sexual predators. There are people who would certainly want to hear as many lurid details as possible. I mean, but it's really a thing. There's no guarantee from a man sponsoring a man that it's going to go well. There's no guarantee that if a woman sponsors a woman, it's going to go well. And there's no guarantee whether you're gay or whether you're straight or whether it's a gay, you know, or two gay people sponsoring each other, it's going to go well. Because ultimately it comes down to emotional and spiritual condition. So at the end of the day, it's an organic relationship, which, I mean, in AA, I waited a couple of weeks, and you walk into an AA room and you could find a sponsor, but I waited a couple of weeks to choose the guy that's sponsoring me, and it was the right choice because we've gone through the entire 12 steps. We speak a couple of times a week, and it's a really good relationship. He totally understands my stuff, totally gets my story, and is able to call me on all sorts of stuff. He really is great. But I took a while, and I think that's really the best rule of thumb. Take a while. Don't come to UA and run in to try to get a sponsor immediately. Take your time. It's common sense and doing the best you can to keep your eyes open. But yeah, I don't think there's any guarantee of any type of organic interaction between people that's going to work one way or the other. It may or may not, whether you're straight, gay, white, black, young, old, male, female, transgender, cross-gender, anything like that. That's pretty much it. That's my feeling on the subject.
Great. Those are some very good comments by Andrew. Come up to the microphone. We're doing questions.
I want to direct this to you, Eddie, just to share my experience, strength, and hope. I've been in AA for 21 years. I would never, ever go to AA and get a male sponsor because I'm heterosexual. I don't think someone should get the sex that they're attracted to. And I have been in SLAA for 20 years. I would never, ever get a male sponsor. When I came to DA, God simply, I thought, could not find me a woman to do a PRG. And I had 2 men. And it was exactly what God wanted me to have. Because when they said something to me, it was so the opposite of what my father had said. And it was so exactly what I needed to hear. And I'm not here in Under Earners Anonymous to talk about my sex life because I don't need to. I'm here to talk about my earning. I'm here to talk about my fears, my resentments, and those kinds of things that are keeping me from having prosperity, that are keeping me in deprivation, my belief systems. And so what I want in a sponsor is someone that will work through those things with me. And there will be men involved, things that happened, but it's not sex. And so I don't think that has anything to do with it. On the other hand, a woman who has never been in any other program before, I would suggest to not get a male sponsor, and especially if he asks you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, hi. I just want to, this is Andrew too. I just want to share a little bit of my experience too. The other thing about this predator thing, and I've had sponsees and other programs, and when guys have found out that I'm sponsoring them, they're like, okay, I'm going to back away because I will be in your face if you're going to try to 13-step someone who's really vulnerable. It's like unacceptable behavior. And so I really have scared a couple guys from hitting on these women. And the other thing is, but that didn't stop me in certain cases. You know what I mean? You didn't take
Yeah.
But in my DA program, I had a male sponsor. In this program, I have a man sponsor, but I gave my 4-step sexual conduct stuff to a female. And also, if there's a creepy thing that's going on with you, talk to other people. Your sponsor isn't the only thing. So you got an action group, you got other people. So we all have interesting things, and anything can be, rationalized. My line is, carrot cake is a vegetable, So anything, I can rationalize anything. So because of that, I got to check stuff out with other people. So this is a we program. If you feel something's funky, get away, or just talk to other people about it, because it may be your own delusional stuff too, but be careful. There's not, it's a tricky thing. We're vulnerable and powerful at the same time, and that's the key.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hi, Carolyn from Irvine again. Grateful, recovering under-earner. My experience, oh my gosh, now that everybody's been breaking anonymities, daily, since mid-70s, I let my grill out of the cage and I give it to someone. I write it down, I give it to her and commit it to my sponsor. And that's what I do on a daily basis with my food. And then I'm part of that fellowship too, SLA. I have a huge awareness of that in my life. And been sober for a long time, oh my gosh, 98 this time. And I have a female AA sponsor, and I've always had female sponsors, but in this fellowship, I'm gonna go back, there weren't enough when I first came in. And the female that I had, that I got from the LA community, who I never did get to meet face to face, there was a thing with competition with her and I, and that's why that kind of went that way. But, and I had those, you know, I still have those issues with my mom, and I work on that all the time, something I'm always doing in my ACA stuff. But the bottom line is I have a sponsor that I never got to see his face for a very long time. And for me, just my personal stuff, he's been more like a father to me, and I needed that father image. My father died about 30 years ago, and that's been so helpful. Even though I feel like, and I know that I'm a precious child of a loving higher power, my loving God, I really appreciated that in this journey with him. And as far as the fourth step stuff, it was suggested by my sponsor to go to my spiritual director, to a safe and closed mouth friend, to disclose that. And with my histories with other inventories, that's what I chose to do. It was a suggestion by him, and it was very healing and continues to be healing when I feel like I can't, when I need to be with my spiritual director, my priest. Okay, thank you.
Hi, I'm Angela. Thank you for that. I have a lot of recovery in the S programs, and my first sponsor actually is now a PhD in sex addiction. And he was the most amazing sponsor for me, and he had really good boundaries, and it really healed me to love and trust men. So I think I watched him in the rooms for a while in that program, and I saw that he was walking his talk. I saw that there were others that weren't, and so it was all about when I asked him where I was at in my head, you know, was I in my addiction or did I really want recovery? So that's what I would suggest, is to read the big book, read Working with Others, and pray at that moment. And that's what really helped me. And the other thing was, after that, then I was able to get a female sponsor. In this program, I really worked through good stuff having male sponsors. I mean, sometimes it was hard, but it really helped me love what I loved about my dad and my brothers and what the men in my life and what was mine and what was not. But I have 33 years of recovery and experience. You know, if you're a newcomer and a guy says, I got the literature at my house, which happened with one of my sponsees in another program. And this guy, I found out, was doing it with a lot of women. And to find out, I didn't know this, but my sponsee had AIDS and gave him the virus.
Oh.
So it was a horrible situation all around. But I think we come in here with stuff, and whatever we're doing out there, we'll do it in here, we'll do it in any place of spirituality. But if we check something out with someone else and run it by someone else, and I'll tell you, when I find out there's a woman that's sleeping around with people's husbands, or there's a man that's doing this stuff, I give names. That's the one place I give names. I told every woman this guy's taking them home to do literature. There's, you know, you don't break anonymity, but within the fellowship, I give names. Anyway, the other thing I wanted to share is I think this temporary sponsorship until you get another sponsor, I have to say, you know me, the healing goddess, I have come across asking women to sponsor me in this program, like when I came in 5 years ago, the most cold women, very rough, not this loving thing, but the men have been very loving here. I'm just saying how it is. I mean, this was rough as nails. I'm like, oh, you know, I'll think about it. It was like, oh my God, and I've been in a lot of programs, I've never come across that. But with the men, it wasn't like that. They wanted to work the steps with you. And so now that there's getting to be a gentler energy and more women from other recovery programs are coming in, I'm feeling more of the heart and the love in UA. So I just thought I'd share that.
Okay. I guess the bottom line on all this is check your motives when you get in that position of thinking about the cross-gender sponsorship, and be aware it is buyers beware, you know. And you can always check a person's reputation out, you know. And the reputation usually you can get a pulse for it very, very quickly, very, very quickly. So, you know, don't jump into, you know, sponsorship in general. Don't jump into it. And if you're considering a cross-gender thing, really think about it, you know, really think about it. And so we're going to, after she's done, we're going to close and we're going to have a little session on back to basics.
Hi, I'm Susan. I have a couple points about this from my own experience, strength, and hope. I was 13th stepped, my first program, my very first meeting. And so there's one point is that another newcomer could have come in there and not responded, but I did because I had stuff to learn, definitely about SAA guys and alcoholic guys, which this guy was. And then the other thing is we've been talking a lot about the sexual part, the erotic, you know, trigger. But there's also the emotional. SLAA is sex and love addiction. So I experienced that part of the emotional bonding to a guy who's nice to me, who's giving me his time, and who's sharing his a true spiritual message, but that also has that other component. So I just wanted to share that. Thanks.
Yeah, that does exist, and there's a certain amount of dependency that happens, and you know, who am I to say it could be skewed? I don't know. This is a judgment that, you know, the individual has to make, you know, and that's just all there is to it, you know. Do you want to say something too?
Yes, I
okay,
do.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so this is the first time I've talked this weekend.
All right.
And this is, hi Eddie, I'm Melody. So yes, that piece is very tough, is you can become dependent on that person. Now we all know we need to be dependent on God. But that piece, if you're going to be dependent on a male when you're a female, that's, you know, that can get really complicated. So that's just what I wanted to say about that.
Okay. All right, great. So the last piece before lunch is back to basics. It's not on the thing. They just decided to add it about 15 minutes ago. And so they asked me to talk about it. How many of you are aware of the Back to Basics movement within UA? Okay, there's, well, a substantial amount of them. Okay, so so you guys know the history of the Back to Basics. Some of you don't. Okay, so let me give you a little bit of that. It is an attempt to go back to the basics of how, theoretically, the process of sponsorship and working the steps that theoretically the original alcoholics went through. The first probably 200,000 of them, and where they had a huge success rate. And one of the ideas is that the reason that the success rate isn't so high today is because of all these other different methodologies, and you only have to use this way. And basically what it involves is doing the steps in 6 hours. And it's a historic approach, and it is pretty much what Dr. Bob did with his sponsees, the 5,000 of them, and it is what the early alcoholics did. It's just a version of the Oxford group that was, you know, amended by Alcoholics Anonymous. And so it got involved. It was brought into UA, what, about a year and a half ago? I'm not sure exactly when. I did the Back to Basics. I probably was the first guy to do Back to Basics in UA before anybody else did it, and I didn't tell people I was doing it, so I wasn't the guy that brought it into UA. And I did the process 5 times on phone. Then I did it, I befriended Wally, who's a historian, a certified alcoholic AA historian. He's got all the records of Dr. Bob and his wife. They entrusted him. He's a historian, official historian, okay? He also has records of other, because AA doesn't keep these records. They trust these records, the journals, the Bibles, the notes, and all that other stuff to historians. And they archive them. He's also an archivist and a historian. Okay, so I also did his process with him in person in Arizona. I flew out to see him. Also did his process at the place in Vermont where Bill Wilson was born. It was 2 years ago at that retreat. I wrote my fourth step in Bill Wilson's childhood bedroom. They were nice enough to give me the keys all weekend. I had access to the library where all these expensive books are, and they trusted me. It was kind of a moving situation for them just to give me the key, and I could have stolen these valuable books, but I didn't, obviously. And so I sat in his Bill Wilson's childhood bedroom, and I wrote my fourth step. I did about a day and a half of that, and then I listened to someone else's fifth step in that same bedroom, and because we matched off doing the process, and now the point is, every time I did that, I got an experience out of doing it, and the experience to a certain degree changed me. Okay, and that originally in the 12-step program was a spiritual experience, and they changed it in the second edition to experience to spiritual awakening, because a lot of people said, "Hey, Bill, when am I going to get my experience?" You know, so some people didn't get. So there's an educational. This is William James's. There's educational, spiritual experiences, and then there's the immediate thing. Every time I did the back to basics, I got a spiritual experience. Every time I did the fourth step workshops with Dion in New York and in California, I got a spiritual experience. Every time I did Joe and Charlie's when they were around in the 80s and 90s, I got a spiritual experience. The nature of spiritual experience is that they wear off. The ego is very, very strong, and the ego can get as spiritual as you can. The ego participates with you when you're in these workshops. Your ego is with you right now. It's learning everything you're learning, and so it gets smart as you, and so your ego constantly rebuilds itself. That's what Dr. Thibault said to Bill. Bill Thibault was Bill's first psychiatrist. And so in order for us to stay ahead of the ego, we need to do 10, 11, 12 on a daily basis. So that's how Back to Basics is set up, is you do the steps in a quick fashion, and then you do 10, 11, 12 on a daily basis. And you really do guidance. The original alcoholics were really heavy on guidance, on prayer and meditation. They took that seriously, and they did it in a group format, you know. They did it, they meditate on it very much like the Quakers did, and then you got messages, and you wrote it on pieces of paper or a notebook, and then these are your guidance, and then you would check out your guidance, you know, and with somebody else, because you might have got a guidance to rob a bank, and that might not be the right thing to do, you know. So you got to check out your guidance where you got your guidance. So they had a very formal way of working these steps, and they were very serious about it. Most people today that are in 12-step programs, from my estimation, don't do that rigorous meditation and trying to get conscious contact from their higher power. I'm just making a judgment, but they don't use the process that they use then where they're in a group and things like that, you know, and check out and make notations of what their meditations came out to be. And we have all the notations of Dr. Bob, and his wife Ann, who was an Al-Anon, did the same thing. She ran all the meditations in early AA. She did, because she was an Oxford group specialist. You know, she knew how to do that better than anybody. So the process in Back to Basics is you do exactly that. You go through the steps, and then now I did that. That doesn't mean I'm not going to do the steps in another way. you know, and I have done the steps in a variety of different ways in my journey of in this program. I've done it in group format. The problem with a group format is when you get to the fourth step, it's hard to share the fourth. You can share resentments and fears in a group, but once you get to the sexual inventory, it gets very difficult if there's people of different sexes in there, and so the tendency is let's try, and then as soon as you try, as soon as anything goes wrong, then usually a group breaks up, or at least half of the group stay. Very few people stay through the whole thing unless they're committed to witnessing someone else's sexual history. If somebody's willing to do that, great. You know, that's a plus, but most people are not willing to do that. So there's a lot of ways of doing the steps within this program. In New York, the biggest meeting in New York City is the Sunday morning meeting, and they do a group process there, or they'll do some other way of doing the steps, you know. And I think you'll find that of the original core people that are in this program, they've each done the steps in a different way, you know. And so I actually think that if it was up to me to design how to work the steps in this program, I would say yes, have meetings like they did in Akron for beginners, where you take them through the steps in a quick and dirty way. Right now, Back to Basics by some people is considered, oh, this is a bastard form of going through this thing, and they're trying to make it a black thing, or how can anybody, you know, because what people are doing 10 minutes is they're doing contempt before investigation. It'd be different if you've tried this way and then try the other way and say this is categorically wrong. And I've done them, and I don't think it's categorically wrong. So if I was to design a way for a new fellowship to work the steps, I say start off with Back to Basics, run the beginners through Back to Basics, have them get a sponsor in Back to Basics, have them do 10, 11, and 12 on a daily basis, have them go out and do their life, have them do action meetings and action partners and goals groups and so on and so forth, and then find a step guide where they can do the long-term version, the 9-month version, 7-month version. And by the way, that's not the longest version. There's another version. The people that have done the Joe and Charlie version and all the other versions, the Joe and Charlie version is considered a college version, and there's a PhD version. The PhD version, tomorrow night here at 7 o'clock, the PhD version of how to do the steps. I'm not kidding you guys. And there's flyers on there on that, and he sells the books, and you can listen to his workshops, pre-recorded workshop that he did for another program. The point I'm trying to make is you're all in recovery. There's a tool in recovery that most of us don't have. It's certainly not a UA thing. It's called bibliotherapy, which means read. Read 12-step literature, read other literature, read whatever, because your brain needs some new input. You know, yes, work the steps, also do bibliotherapy. So check out all these other processes, see what resonates within you. Have an experience. You will have an experience. Like if you go to Paris, you will have an experience. You can't avoid not having experience going to Paris if you've never been there. It's the same thing. Go and do this process. Do whatever process you want. Have an experience. Go on with your life. Keep working the steps. Get another. Do the 9-month version. Do the 13-month version. Become your own expert on the steps. You know, and it's all meant to get you into having a conscious contact, as much as continuous conscious contact with the God of your understanding or the God of your not understanding, you know. So that's all it's for. That's all it's for, and to give you a life in a different kind. And each one of these processes will give you something else. So just explore. And definitely do not pathologize one over the other. You will. I think you're an exception. You will graduate. I know I won't.
Could you address if somebody has to be a sponsor and you haven't yet worked out
Yeah, sure, I can do that too. I believe in the old school way. The old school way was, if a guy's done a step ahead of you, a guy's been. When I first got involved, I said, "Well, how do you know if a guy's qualified to sponsor you? Is he a day more in the program than you? Then he can sponsor you. You know that's sponsorship. That's not a step guide. A step guide is different. See, again, it's terminology. In this program, we've decided that a sponsor is someone that actually takes you to the step. And as you can see, the sponsor does not have contact with you except once a week. So, again, it's how you want to, what kind of support you want, In some way, your action partner is more of your sponsor in this program than anybody else because he has more contact with you. He doesn't hear your fourth step. He doesn't hear your fears and resentments. He doesn't hear some of your other stuff. But in some way, he's more of your day-to-day action person. And that was the theory in sponsorship early on. You've done the steps. Now you need like a coach to help you get out there and do your life. And many people got in with this process, got extremely, extremely, extremely successful. But they obviously weren't bit with the under-earning bug. We were. So that's a whole different dynamic. Did I answer your question?
There's some people say you can't sponsor unless you've done all 12 steps.
Of course some people do.
Okay, can you just press it on the microphone? 'Cause that's...
Well, okay, it used to be that when I came into this program, it was you work the steps with anybody in any program. And then certain people got more power, control, whatever, and then they changed it. Had a vote in the group, in GSB, to make it that you can only sponsor if you have a sponsor in this particular program. Do you know any other program on the planet that says you have to go to a sponsor in this particular program? It's never a requirement. They don't even specify it that way. So, but this is a new fellowship, and this is what we're doing. This is what they've decided to do right now. And by the way, it was an old GSB, so maybe who knows what the new GSB will do. And who knows, maybe that's the right way. I don't know what it is. I have no idea. I'm not a crystal ball. I'm just who I am. And to tell you the truth, I don't have a real, I wish it wasn't that way, but if it is that way, it's still okay, I wish it wasn't that. I wish it was the other way. But maybe there's value in that. I don't know. The last thing I can tell you is I don't know. There's a question back there?
Yeah, for me, for the newcomer, what would be the first thing you would tell? Does anyone here needs to know the first thing to do? What would be the first thing you would suggest for a woman or a man to do? Never do the steps.
Well, okay, there's a philosophy, 5 more minutes. There's a philosophy of taking the steps, studying the steps, working the steps. Those are 3 different philosophies. The early AA thing is taking the steps. Okay, so I would encourage you to go through, there's a phone process. There's a guy in Northern California that does it. I've never met him. I think it's great that he's doing it. I was just surprised one day I wake up in the morning and somebody's doing it. I just say, okay, that's cool, And so get on one of those and take the steps, or maybe do it in person. I don't know if anybody, I wish we could do it in person, at least on one live meeting where you can go, because there's a huge power in standing up and saying yes. That whole process that's there, it's a turnover process. It's taking the steps. There's also studying the steps. I mean, you can read the literature and study it. I've done that. A lot of people do that. You can read other books about the steps. That's studying the steps. And then there's also what some people call working the steps. For some people, working the steps is only doing 10, 11, and 12 on a daily basis if you've done all the other ones already. I didn't mean to give you a finger. But, and then for other people, working the steps means going through a 9-month version. So it's just whatever. I think there's value in all of it. I've never been the person to exclude anything. Instead of either or, I believe in both and. Both and will always get you to a better place than either or. Either or will always get you into a kind of dysfunctional place. Both and is always better. Any other questions?
I have found this program,
Mm-hmm. Well, Back to Basics is taking you through the big book. It is a big book approach. They read the original lines, and there still exists. The Akron meeting that had the first big Back to Basics meeting where they guide you through in a group format still exists. The very meeting in the same building still exists. Okay, and in that meeting you can't share unless you got 50 years of recovery. You can't open your mouth. Okay, so that exists. There's also a meeting like that here in I believe it's in Brentwood or something like that. It's a complete recreation of that. So that process still exists. And what they do is they highlight certain lines out of the big book, exactly what they was. It's a historic approach. You want to experience a historic approach, what was done 50, 60, 70 years ago, experience it. That's all I'm asking. All I'm saying is, why not experiencing? It'd take a month out of your life, or if you did it on a one-day thing, it'd take 6 out of your life. I guarantee you're going to have an experience when you're done. It'll be a different experience than 9 months of brutal, hour by hour doing it. We're done with 2 minutes. Okay, let's open up for questions.
This is Susan. My sponsor's taking me through the 12 steps in UA by using the big book. I mean, the 12 and 12. Mm-hmm. What's the difference if she, between her taking me through the 12 and 12 or the big book?
Well, Bill wrote the 12 and 12 many, many years later, like 15 years later. So it's a reflection of how the steps work. He dictated it to Tom Powers. He was pretty sick at the time, and Tom Powers was a Catholic, and so he put a lot of his spin on it. We don't know how much was actually what Bill said and what Tom Powers said, so some people don't even believe in it. The purists don't even believe in it. And there's other things, and it's an extremely well-written book. It's very flowery. It's almost poetry, the 12 and 12. It's amazing. It's an amazing book. But some people say, how can you work the 12 steps on it? There's no guidebooks on the 12 and 12. Like there's guidebooks on a big book. You can find them all over the place. It's hard. I only know of one person that's worked the steps in the big book fashion, especially with the 7 deadly sins. I'm not allowed to say who his name is, but I only know one person that I know of that actually did that and did a thorough inventory on the 7 deadly sins. And he's a member of this program, he's a member of other programs. And when I heard him say that, my jaw dropped, because I've never heard anybody actually putting himself through that ordeal to do that. But it's more of an explanation than it is a methodology. See, the big book at least has a methodology. It's almost like a cookbook. Although the 4-column inventory was never used in AA. It was an explanation of an inventory that was used in the Oxford group, and it was never even used. I saw it in a little pamphlet. I said, oh, here's the 4-column thing. This is where Bill took this example from, But they never really used it. Used it as an example. But that doesn't mean that somebody 30 years ago figured out how to do it, and it's a great thing. We're out of time, guys. Okay.
Thank you, Eddie.
Yeah.
All right, everybody. So it's lunchtime at 2 o'clock. Matt. Yeah, lunchtime at 1. At 2 o'clock, actually, anyone that has not paid or checked in, if you can meet me in the back for a quick check-in and get caught up. At 2 o'clock, Matt and I are going to share our experience, strength, and hope on being multiply addicted and involved in multiple 12-step programs from a time point of view, a spiritual point of view, how it affects our recovery in this program. So 2 o'clock will be starting.